something for your 58th birthday celebration. The perfect gift for a commander-in-chief. Unbelievably expensive and entirely unique. Trophies from a place you've never been before. Souvenirs from the inferno of unnecessary war. So here's a river of blood, here's a field of bone, here's a handful of splinters that used to be a home. Here's a man on a box with weights on his head. Here's a man on the floor with his legs outspread. 1,000 dog collars and electrified cocks. Grinning soldiers using torture as a photo op. Hi, Mom. Hi, honey. The army's really
Tonight we have a very timely show. We're talking about political participation, and that's basically just our starting point because there's so much going on this year, and it is, in my opinion, very important that every citizen, no matter what your point of view, participates this year just because there are so many different things at stake. And I do have two very special guests today, one returning guest, Jackie Sheeler, welcome.
Hi, thanks,
Pete
John.
Dullock,
Welcome.
welcome. Okay, like I said, we're starting with the basics of political participation. Why is political participation important, in your opinion, Jackie?
Well, for the average person, I mean, we all have to participate. If we don't, the corporations will utterly run the country. That's already almost the case, that money makes the decisions. We still have a voice in this country, but if we don't start using it aggressively at every chance we get, we may not have a voice too much longer. I mean, as I see it, the current administration's goal is to silence anyone who's not a millionaire, really, so that the country can just be formatted in such a way to accommodate the very well-to-do and their interests, and the rest of us need to just kind of buzz off. And we can't give them that.
And would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, I would agree with that. Participation is a multiple level thing. In November and a couple of weeks from now, we'll all pull a lever for, whomever we're going to vote for. And it's important. I think we should do that. But, elections don't really decide things. They really don't. What really decide things is when there's social forces, when there's movements in the street, if there's lots of bodies in the streets. That's really what it takes to get things done, because if there's enough angry people in the streets and enough people demonstrating and doing what they can to create pressure, boycotts, all kinds of different tactics, then it matters less who's in office, because whoever's in office is going to be forced to alter their behavior. So that's part of the problem. Why, if people who think, well, all right, we'll vote for Kerry because if you want Bush out, well, that's what you're going to do in the election booth in November. But if that's all you're going to do, you're really not going to change anything, because if there's no pressure on Kerry, he's going to basically do the same things Kerry will. He'll do it slower and a little bit more nuanced. Yes, and for people who are really under the gun in this society, the most oppressive people, that can make a difference concretely in people's lives, and I'm not underestimating that. But basically, there's not going to be that much of a change between them. So that's political participation has to be thought of as a very broad-based thing, and not simply narrowly voting in an election and saying, okay, I did my participation, and now we'll see what happens in the next 2 years.
Right, and yeah, the person who only goes out and votes once every 4 years and doesn't take an active part in shaping their own community, which that's the foundation of everything else to a certain extent.
Absolutely. I mean, we can take a lesson from the anti-war movement. Now, a lot of people got discouraged, and really they shouldn't have. And the reason they got discouraged is like, well, we had the two big demonstrations in New York, we had the big demonstration in Washington, and well, gosh, the war happened anyway. Bush went in and invaded Iraq anyway. Oh well, I guess we'll go home now, and oh heck, we tried. But that's not really, just going to a couple of demonstrations on its own isn't going to, by itself, stop things. It'll might make them stop and pause a little bit. Going to the demonstration, that's easy, and not for the people who organize it. I've organized enough demonstrations to know that's hard, but it's doing all the other work surrounding that.
And I just want to remind our viewer that we are talking about political participation, and this program wants your participation at 718-460-9802, and we have a caller on the line. Caller, please join in the conversation whenever you're ready. Hello? Caller? Okay, we've lost our caller, but that's okay. Again, the number is 718-460-9802. Anything that you want to say about the political process or the upcoming election, we welcome your input. You were saying?
Okay, and you can't look at it in a completely all or nothing thing. Okay, we didn't stop the war, but demonstrations on their own was not going to stop the war. There's other work that goes on and other tactics that you do in conjunction with that. But all those global demonstrations, I mean, it served two purposes. One, it was unprecedented to have literally tens of millions of people in the street in countries all around the world. But it also, at least it altered the conduct of the war. Because remember, there was a big show of they were going to do the shock and awe where they were going to bombard Baghdad with 600 missiles, and they had this horrible thing. And of course, what they did to Baghdad was horrible, and thousands of people, innocent Iraqi civilians died. I'm not minimizing that in any way. But they didn't do the full shock and awe tactic. They had to pull back from that and do part of the destruction that they wanted to do rather than the entirety of the destruction that they wanted to do. And it also made them speed it up. They probably wanted to take a little more time to really, really lay waste to the whole country before they went into Baghdad. And they pretty much had to speed their way in there. So again, an enormous amount of damage and a great many civilians who died. But the damage was not as bad as it would have been had there not been a movement out there. So people who participated in those demonstrations, don't look at it as a defeat. There was a concrete victory. It may have been a small one. It may have merely altered their behavior. But, there are people in Iraq who are alive because of those demonstrations. That's a concrete victory.
Hey, do you know what's the current death count of Iraqis? Do you happen to know that the present number? I had heard a figure in the area of 30,000. Is that about right?
Probably it's something like that. There's a group called Iraq Body Count that keeps a running tag. I believe it's iraqbodycount.net on there. And they have a very, very conservative methodology. And they acknowledge themselves that, well, here's the figures that we can come up with. This is very likely an underestimate. And they're somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 to 16,000.
Okay, and well, this is the first time that I'm actually hearing these numbers, which...
And that's up at the root of the problem. Mainstream media, I mean, we knew the minute we got to the 1,000th dead soldier, American soldier, and certainly that's a significant number and a number that we all need to be aware of. But I can't believe that most of the citizens in this country don't give a damn about tens of thousands of dead Iraqi civilians. And I think it's a real perversion that the mainstream media completely ignores facts like that, plays to the fear rather than to the compassion always. And there's this viewpoint, which I think is at the root of most of our political problems today and some of the challenges here, this viewpoint that only what happens to Americans matter. Like behead one American and there will be, yellow ribbons hanging from 4 million trees from here to the West Coast, but behead 14 Frenchmen the same day and we'll barely hear about it. And I'm just kind of throwing ideas out as a comparison, but it's, if we've got 16,000 dead Iraqi civilians and you've got to go to a website that frankly most people have never heard of to find that number, then something's wrong with the way with the conversations that we're having. We're not talking necessarily about the right things. We're not talking about people, about, in Fahrenheit 9/11, the scene with the older woman standing in front of the rubble of her home after having buried her eighth or ninth relative dead, in the bombings, just incoherent with her grief and rage that she didn't even seem to know what she was saying at a certain point. That could be anybody's grandma. If she was speaking in English and standing on Main Street, This would become the new icon for, you know, the horrors and tragedies of war. But because this is a foreigner, it doesn't matter to us. That's not important. All that matters is, you know, this count that's getting up to 1,000 and rationalizing what we're doing there. And really, the ugly truth is it's all about protecting the American lifestyle and making sure that there can still be a Gap and a Starbucks on every corner. And I really believe that if we were given the choices with some kind of clarity, Americans would say, you know what, close the Starbucks. Close the Gap. Let's have some kind of parity here. We don't have to have the air conditioner on, you know, 24 hours a day in August. We can make some compromises. No, we don't want to live in Bombay. We don't want to go back to the third world. But we don't have to be this exclusive little sphere at the cost of everyone else, which is what we're doing right now.
Okay,
And-
counterpoint. You know, why should I have to sweat for them? Yeah, them. Yeah, not.
Right. And it's not a them, it's us. This
Yeah.
planet's getting smaller every minute. And I don't think that there's any way to not be aware of that now. We have to be the solution. The solution is the compassion and kinship with other human beings, even the ones we disagree with. Because there's no way for this species to survive if we don't do that. Our weapons, our so-called toys, our pastimes have all become too costly.
Well, what's making this information so invisible or inaccessible to so many people? And why isn't this? I mean, if all this information is so moving and visibly, you know, the devastation is so visible there, why isn't everybody seeing it? I mean, why doesn't Fox
Well,
News
I
have it
would
on the
say
air? Why doesn't
probably-
CNN have it on the air?
I would say probably some of that is because of corporate control of the media. And, you know, again, we get back to money. You know, we don't want, we have to keep this certain mindset or it's going to disturb, you know, maybe Jaguar won't advertise in the Times supplement if there are articles about certain things that might disturb their German subsidiary. I mean, I used to work for Business Week magazine. We'd see those kind of conflicts all the time, that subtle, constant pressure of the dollar. I mean, really, I don't see anything other than for all the talk in the present administration about Christianity and God and all this, I don't see any of that in reality in the current social discourse, political discourse. I don't see any compassion. I don't see any kind of fellow feeling. I don't see anything but ensuring that the financial well-being of the party and the candidate is taken care of. That is the number one concern. And that's, you know, it's the number one concern of corporations. You know, the corporations, and we're not talking about nonprofits here, nonprofits, you know, it's what a scathing kind of a category to even call them, when they're really mostly just the companies that are interested in doing positive work. But the companies that are ruled by the stock market, and I am using the word ruled very specifically, you know, they're not allowed to consider anything other than the dollar. They're not allowed, so it's like Dow destroying Bhopal. You know, they're not allowed. There's nobody that could go into the Dow boardroom and say, you know what, we really blew this big time, and we owe it to the people who are being destroyed by our mistakes to make it right. But they can't do that because the stockholders would go crazy because it would cost the company money. And now somebody who doesn't know anything about Bhopal and has never even worked a day in their life for Dow and is totally 1,000 miles removed from the issues, from the impact, is saying, wait a minute, why'd the stock go down 30 cents? Why are they sending $1 billion to this town in India that I never heard of?
All right,
And
well,
that runs.
give a little bit of the backstory on that particular issue.
I don't know all the details.
Okay.
I know that there was a huge chemical, I think it was a chemical plant. Do you know the details on that
yes,
one, Pete?
actually I do, Jackie. It was a chemical plant in Bhopal, India. Geez, I guess it was sometime in the 1980s now. It was quite a while ago now. And basically there were no environmental standards, so basically Dow just ran it without any kind of standards, without doing anything to implement any kind of reasonable safety precautions. And one day they had an industrial accident and all these chemicals just flew out of the place, and it was literally a toxic cloud that billowed out of this plant. And literally tens of thousands of people died, and who knows how many, probably the injured on that probably ran into 6 digits. And so after that, it's been 20 years now, and people in Bhopal are still trying to get redress for that because they sued in United States courts, and Dow says, "Oh, no, no, no! Why it took place in India? Why it should be held in India?" Where, of course, they don't have quite the up-to-date legal standards that a lot of other countries do, and it's this constant going around and using technicalities and trying to change jurisdictions and venues and all that. So basically, for 20 years now, Dow has been fighting this off, and no one has ever been held accountable for all these tens of thousands of deaths and a couple hundred thousands of injuries.
And the area is still toxic, isn't it?
I would imagine it's still toxic. It doesn't sound like you'd be wanting to live anywhere
Part of
near
what they were
Bhopal.
suing for was a cleanup.
Right.
You know, medical care for the survivors and a cleanup. It's not a whole lot to ask.
Asked for.
Okay, well, and how do the corporations tie into the political process?
Well, basically, because you got the money, you got the power, and who has the money, but for the corporation. So what you have, and let's call things by let's get to the root of the problem, and we have an economic system in place in this country, and it's designed for more and more money to be funneled into fewer and fewer hands. Anytime you have an open-ended capitalist system where there's very little in the way of checks and balances, and what little we have are getting shipped away at, inevitably more and more money is going to be concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, and in this kind of system, that money automatically translates into power. So we get down to a point where a handful of entities effectively can control everything. I mean, just look at the corporate media now. There's literally, if you sat down and really ironed it out, there's literally 12 corporations that essentially control the whole media. And I'm not talking about just television or just radio, I'm talking about all these things: television, radio, newspapers, internet, magazines, pretty much everything across the board, because they own so many different things now.
And I know that there's at least one in particular that is in violation of regulations, of ownership regulations in New York. Just by owning a newspaper and 2 local television stations.
Well, not anymore, because that used to be that they used to have the cross ownership rules from the Federal Communications Commission. And what happened is when Murdoch, who of course is who you're referring to, owned the New York Post, and he wanted to buy Channel 5, which of course now he does own along with his television network. Those rules were still in place. So basically, Murdoch went to Congress and he says, gee, I really want to own everything, so why don't we just get rid of this? And literally, Congress passed through a special law designed especially for him to allow him to do that. And then after that, they says, well, gee, if we can do this for Murdoch, then why do we need these rules anyway? And then very shortly thereafter, then they passed a general rule where they completely overturned that rule. So now there are slight limits on the number of television or radio stations you can own in one specific city, but it's a lot. I mean, I remember when I was a student, you could own 1 TV, 1 AM, and 1 FM.
Right.
Now you can own 8, 9, 10, and just in one, and then in every city you can duplicate that. So eventually, again, you acquire all this money and power, and now you have the money to go and start buying up all the other entities everywhere else, and it just mushrooms. It's
Okay.
expand or die. That's the dirty secret of capitalism.
And just talking about power, I just want to give one of our callers the power to speak up and say what's on your mind, and we are taking calls at 718-460-9802. Caller, whenever you're ready, just say hello.
Hello?
Yes?
I am really appalled at this program. I support our president, and I think that you are being very unpatriotic at a time of war. And I'm just so upset with people like you who question the actions of our government. We're supposed to support our president and not to question and to make claims the way you're making that are absolutely false. And I just resent this whole thing, and I'm going to vote for Bush, and because he deserves to be the president. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your call. We do appreciate your comments, and yeah, the caller is entitled to her opinion.
I would have been interested to hear some details, though, on what we had represented inaccurately.
Exactly. I mean, you do a lot of speaking engagements.
Yeah.
And do you get a lot of response of that type?
You know, when I do, it's often in that manner, kind of just the vague, oh, you're saying wrong things and none of it is true and our president's a good guy. And that the business of we should support the president in time of war is always particularly interesting to me because we shouldn't be in this war. We're only in this war because his daddy got dissed. Let's get real. If anybody else was in the White House after 9/11, we would not have, in so-called response to that, headed for Iraq. It defies all logic. No one can justify it. They're doing post-mortems on it. There's no weapons of mass destruction. There's no reason for there to be a war. And then to use that war as the reason why the incompetent president should remain in office who got us there in the first place, that is the worst kind of circular logic. He made a huge mistake and we're stuck in it, and therefore we should keep him where he is. Why? So that he can make another mistake? So that we can go to war with North Korea in his second term? What, you know, all Bush is interested in is rolling back women's rights, which he's doing at the speed of light, rolling back all environmental protections. He actually sued the state of California when it started to pursue a more aggressive standard for car emissions. They stepped up the plan, and the federal government, under Bush's order, sued California because they were being unfair to the auto manufacturers. I can't comprehend that kind of thinking. Yes, here's the planet Earth. Here's the auto manufacturers. By all means, let's give it to the auto manufacturers. Screw this planet. We won't be around when it turns to crap, or they're expecting that their billions will protect them. And in that, they may be right. But their billions won't protect you or me or the other, 100 million of us who are not quite so privileged in this country. We won't have our little satellites to go to the moon or wherever they decide to send themselves after they've destroyed what's here. And that is what's happening. Look at the weather. Look what's happened in Florida. This stuff is not a coincidence. There's that thing going around the internet with the map of Florida saying, oh, it only hit the Republican counties. So that was, okay, that's entertaining. But really, in a real sense, it is those type of policies, those environmentally destructive policies that are coming back at us now in ways that none of these people, for all their big talk and for all their resources, can control. This planet starts to spin out, there's nobody going to be able to bring it back.
Okay.
Right. And let's bring it back to Iraq, because Jackie brought up an excellent point now. And right, we got all this panic, Saddam Hussein is coming, he's got weapons of mass destruction, he's coming to get you, he's going to steal your kid tomorrow morning and all this stuff. And is Saddam Hussein bad? Yeah, of course he is. But how did Saddam Hussein get into power, and why did he have so much power over the Iraqi people? Who supported Saddam Hussein? Now, it's interesting. Now we're supposed to invade Iraq because maybe he's thinking about having weapons of mass destruction, so we better go in and take care of it. But in the 1980s, when he not only did have weapons of mass destruction, he used them with the assistance and approval of the United States government, and then he was the U.S.'s best buddy in the Middle East.
Well,
it's so incredibly
It's not the first time in
hypocritical.
history that the United States has gone and taken out someone that they put in power to begin with.
Noriega?
Yeah.
Noriega, exactly.
And we do have a caller. Caller, whenever you're ready, just feel free to jump in and say hello. Rades? Hello?
Try again, caller.
Yeah, well, give us a call back. We want your calls at 718-460-9802. We are talking about political participation, the upcoming election, and just whatever's on your mind. We welcome it.
Okay, now where did Saddam Hussein get the idea to use the poison gas on the Kurds, which he did do on one occasion? Is because he was regularly using chemical gas on the Iranian army during the 1980 to 88 war between Iran and Iraq. And not only did the U.S. know he was doing it, the Defense Intelligence Agency, remember, the CIA may be the world's biggest intelligence agency, but the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is run by the Pentagon, is the world's second largest intelligence agency. And they were directly working with the Iraqi government, giving them battle plans and giving them assistance in order to help them in their war. And they knew very well. At one point, a DIA agent was actually inspected a battlefield immediately, something like 24 hours after the Iraqis had won this battle, by using gas on there. And their reaction was, well, hey, it's another way to kill the other side. We don't care. In fact, on two separate occasions, the Defense Department or other people in the White House actually threw up objections to a transfer of weaponry, including helicopters, to Iraq. And George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 1, personally intervened on both kinds to overrule the Commerce Department and the Defense Department and say, no, we're sending those helicopters over to Saddam Hussein. Complete hypocrisy.
Okay, and we do have a caller on the line, Valdez. Jump in and join the conversation.
Yes, I'm right here.
Okay, do you have a question or comment?
Well, I'll tell you something. I just get home from work, and not just looking for the game, you know, for the Yankee and all that game they started o'clock. I know that, but I never see something like that on TV. How they been doing this, sacrifice the animal like that. So that's they call it sport, something like that. But we have to do something. I get so nervous. I never see something like that. How this animal, they throw all the blood through their mouth and nose and ear and from the top. And let me tell you something. The last word they were talking about, they saw the Pepsi Cola was in there also by the size. And I have that in my mind to say about that comment, how Pepsi, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, some company like that we go in there and eat and spend our money, and they do that to kill the animal. It's something incredible. I never see something like that on TV.
Okay, well, we do appreciate your comments. We are also discussing the political situation in the country. Do you have a comment about that tonight? Okay. Well, little tangent there. Yeah, any comments are appreciated, but a little bit off topic. And do you
I wanted to talk about this Michael Moore thing in Michigan. The Republican Party, I don't know if it was officially the Republican Party. I don't know who actually filed the complaint, but that they've actually filed a complaint against Michael Moore in several cities in Michigan because he's holding these large public talks. And anyone, I believe, that's over the age of 23 who has never registered to vote, if they register to vote that night, they get a bonus at the talk. If it's a guy, he gets a pack of 3 Fruit of the Loom underwear, and if it's a girl, she gets like a crate of ramen noodles. And I can't remember what it's kind of a funny thinking behind that. I don't remember what the details were. And it doesn't really matter. It's a pretty trivial, here's some underwear, here's a pack of noodles, you know, it's the discount soup. And that actually this is being twisted to say that he's bribing people to vote and therefore should be arrested. And it's interesting to me that the Republicans are so afraid to see young people being registered to vote because, I mean, it's a political party. Shouldn't they be happy? Don't we want everybody in this country to vote?
Well, you know what it is? He's giving away ramen noodles. He's just afraid of people using their noodles. And we do have a caller. We have Anna on the line. Anna?
Hi.
Hi.
I'd like to thank you and your guest for the program that you're offering. And in response to the lady that called earlier, I'm really sorry she feels that way. But, you know, sometimes I feel like Dorothy, and we're not in Kansas anymore. This is not America anymore. And just the thought terrifies me. It's very difficult to speak the truth to power and not feel like you're going to be crushed at any moment. And I just want to thank you people for not being intimidated by the whole atmosphere that's obviously taking over this country. And I guess I feel bad for the lady that called because she reminds me of my father-in-law, God rest his soul. His motto was America, right or wrong. And that mentality, I guess, from World War II and World War I, and, you know, it's understandable, and at the same time, it's very sad because it is what's going to stifle any hopes of democracy in the United States, let alone any place else in the world. Again, thank you so much, and don't stop.
Okay, well, thank you for your comment, Anna. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Are you active in the community as well?
I try to be.
Okay, well...
I'm not as active as I'd like to be, I'll be honest. I'll admit it, too. I'm a coward. I am not ashamed to, well, actually, I am ashamed to admit that I am a coward. So I limit my activism based on, the relationship of the neighborhood, and you just have to be so careful what you say and who you say it to. You never know. Nowadays, things are getting so scary that you don't know that you're going to be beat down on a corner for saying the wrong thing. But this is the kind of intimidation tactics that, sadly, not just the Republicans, but the Democrats, too. I mean, why don't we have 3, 4, 5 parties? What's the concept of a Democrat and a Republican is like two sides of the same mouth.
Yes.
There's nothing, to really circumvent that unless, there's a real revolution. And when was the last time we had one of those here? Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank
God
you. You
speed.
too. We appreciate your call.
Yeah, well, Anna, you're brave enough to call up and talk to folks you don't know. So I don't think you're nearly a much of a coward as you're jokingly calling yourself there. So I hope you keep speaking out and not be intimidated. I think that's very important that all of us not be intimidated. But let's take up the point of the two parties. Why do we only have two parties? And it's the whole winner-take-all thing where our Congress, our national legislature, and then of course the state level and the local level is the same way. It's all, you get more votes than anybody else, you get it all. There's no thing. I think if we had a proportional representational system like you generally have in Europe, then we would have 4 or 5 or 6 parties, and all these different shades of opinions would have somewhere to go and to be represented there. So, you get 20% of the votes, well, you get 20% of the seats in the Congress. If we did it that way, we wouldn't have to rely on any more Republicans and Democrats. Well, they'd probably still be there, but there'd be lots of other parties, and people wouldn't feel the need to hold their nose to vote for the Democrats, and some people hold their nose and vote for Republicans. I have people in my family who do that. So, that's a whole nother discussion on how the whole political system politically is structured.
Well, and it's true, and honestly, even for Democrats now, people are not exactly jumping up and down in delight at the idea of John Kerry becoming the president.
Right.
I would be thrilled to see him win the election on November 2nd, not because I'm thrilled about John Kerry, but because I think that 4 more years of Bush would be a disaster. I don't know that the country, we barely survived the first 4 years. If he's got 8 years in office, the damage may well be undoable. Much of it is already undoable. So that's terrifying. So it's not quite as bad as hold your nose, but I'm certainly not motivated to vote for Kerry because of my genuine enthusiasm for his ideas or leadership.
Right.
It's really an anybody but Bush
Right.
is the thinking, and Kerry is the one chance under our current political party to defeat him in the coming election, and that is unfortunate.
Right.
We do need more
So
choice.
It's the matter of, the lesser of two evils, not the evil of two lessers.
Right.
Yeah. And we do have a caller on the line. We have Arlene. Arlene, whenever you're ready, say hello.
Hello.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. I wanted to call up because I'm so happy to hear your honesty. I wanted to give you information that I believe that the 9/11 truth, the families that could not speak at the hearings, whether in New York or Washington, finally was able to speak to the people who really did know what happened. We have the Holy Grail, and I'd like to share it with you. 2 things. Stan Hilton, who happened to be the senior advisor for Bob Dole, had spoken to FBI informants and FBI men, the people from NORAD, the people from FAA, and they all have documentation that George Bush and Dick Cheney personally signed off on 9/11. They spoke about that they were wargaming for 3 months, that he watched it on the video, that Dick Cheney was involved in wargaming 3 separate incidences, and that the war game at 8:30 was planes flying in at 8:30 in the morning to Washington, D.C., along with the World Trade Center. What actually transpired is, and this is also a key thing, a young lady spoke. She worked for J.P. Morgan. She did risk management, and she found out that P-Tech, this is very important, you can look it up on the internet, the head financier from Al-Qaeda got the contract for the White House, Air Force One, the United States Navy, Department of Energy, Congress, both Senate and House of Representatives, the IRS, where they go into the computer and at any time they could change the software. That's why the FAA and NORAD saw 22 false positives. All of this was conducted by them and Dick Cheney. And I'd like to get your response on that.
Okay.
Well, you know, I don't have any personal firsthand knowledge of the events that you just laid out, but I will say that there is no doubt that the events of 9/11 were the single biggest bonus that George Bush got in his presidency, and that if 9/11 hadn't happened the way that it did, he would not have anywhere near the popularity ratings that he was able to achieve subsequently. People ran to Daddy as a result. Now, does that make me believe that they had foreknowledge and planned 9/11? I hope to God they didn't. I have very little faith in them as leaders. I have none. But I don't want to believe that our current leadership would have been capable of perpetrating that on American citizens. It's bad enough that they do it out in the world.
Well, there's a lot of unanswered questions about 9/11, and what happened on 9/11? What's the true story? I don't know. I'm not going to pretend that I know, but boy, there sure are a lot of questions, aren't there? And the Bush administration sure saw 9/11 as a wonderful opportunity. This has been an opportunity for them. That's why the Republican convention was here 2 months ago. It was an opportunity to take advantage of that, and the delegates, I was out in the streets the whole convention. Boy, they were just dumbfounded. Why were all these angry people there? And that's what I kept saying to them. It's like, well, how could you come here and take advantage of 9/11? And they would just scurry away. Here's another open-ended question I have on 9/11. Now, when the Pentagon was struck, it was almost an hour after the second plane hit the World Trade Center. Now, the first plane hits, people don't know what's going on. Okay, if we want, we can grant a little time there. But once the second plane hit, well, I don't think there's any doubt, or should not have been any doubt, that, there's an attack going on here. Now, there's an Air Force base right outside of Washington, just to the east in Maryland. That Air Force base exists solely to provide protection for Washington, D.C. There's no other reason for it there. It's 5 minutes flight time there, and no planes ever scrambled. And that plane, the third plane, came in almost an hour after the second plane hit the World Trade Center and slammed, and did a 360 to slam into the Pentagon. The guy had to do maneuvers to get in there, and no plane. Why? How? That's one of many questions I think we still haven't had answered, and the 9/11 Commission certainly has not answered or addressed.
Well, thank you for your call. And, okay, there's a lot of money to be made on war contracts.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And I just kind of want to get your feelings on that vein. I'd like to run on that track for a little while.
Well, I mean, can start right with Dick Cheney, the guy who's really in charge. I mean, George W., he's the guy they kind of put in front of the camera and say, okay, smile, and here's the script. And they've trained him pretty
Try
well.
to be charming.
He's not as good an actor as Reagan was, but he's trying.
No, he's doing to the best of his ability. We'll give him credit for that. Obviously, Reagan was the master at faking sincerity. But Cheney's the guy who's in charge, right? Now, here's a guy who ran Halliburton for 5 years. Remember, he had a long career in Congress. He had a career as defense secretary in previous administrations. It's a well-known fixture. So the people who ran Halliburton said, hey, come on in and take over because, wink, wink, we know you'll be able to bring in all the goodies. And I'm sure he brought in lots of goodies, no doubt about that. So he resigns when he officially becomes the vice presidential nominee. it got a little bit of attention at the time, but then it kind of got quietly dropped. Cheney took with him a $26 million golden parachute with him. He held $26 million worth of stock options and other assorted goodies with him, and saw no contradiction or of any sort in hanging on to this. There was a little bit of an outcry, so he sold off some of his stock options. But he does have some things, and he still continues to get a payment under whatever severance package he got. So no matter what he denies or lies about, Dick Cheney continues to this day to get a regular check from Halliburton. He has a direct interest in the continued profitability of Halliburton. These people in the Bush administration are personally profiting from this. And of course, they're all connected to this. Let's face it, war is very profitable because we've got this gigantic military budget. Whatever happened to the peace dividend? And
But didn't they just cut soldiers' pay?
Yes, they cut soldiers' pay, they cut combat pay, they did all these things. Now they have the backdoor draft going in because once you're in, you can't leave. And after you leave, there's a certain period of,
8 years.
Right, you're right. You have a period of 8 years where technically you're eligible to be called back up. In practice, you're not expecting that to happen. But all these people, they've been out of the Army or the National Guard for years, and all of a sudden they get the phone call, guess what? You're back in, and you're shipping off to Iraq, completely throwing people's lives completely out of whack. And these mercenaries, we always call them the contractors. Let's call them mercenaries. Let's call things by their real name, please. These mercenaries are getting paid 10 times more than the soldiers are, and sometimes they're doing a similar job. So not only are these soldiers getting their pay cut, they're making starvation wages and getting killed and maimed for life. And then they bring in all these high-power contractors through all these very ultra-politically connected things, and these guys are making a fortune out of them. Some of them are in a little harm's way, although certainly not anywhere near to the degree that the soldiers are in harm's way. So there's lots of people making lots of money off this. That's the important thing. Not just the oil companies. We focus on the oil companies, but there's plenty of defense contractors and construction. Right, Lockheed, and then Bechtel. Right? After all, there were two prime people in the Reagan administration who were Bechtel executives. So Cap Weinberger and George Shultz. And, it just goes around and around. This is a little interconnected circle.
It's amazing just, hearing all this, having this conversation, and being able to share it with the viewers, which, as we've said numerous times, this information just isn't, it's available, but you got to dig for it.
Yes.
And you have to dig for it mostly from the foreign press.
Right,
Yes.
or for kind of alternatives. That's one good thing.
Alternet.org. People who want this kind of information, if you have access to the internet, if you start at alternet.org, sign up for their mailing lists, it'll start to trickle in. You'll get links to other sites where you can actually start to glean some of this information.
Right, and I know Alternet, they also have a version available that you can, if you have a Palm Pilot or another type of
Oh, do
PDA, you can download it right
That's
into
great.
it, and this way you can kind of carry the information on the go.
That's great.
But as a result of everything else that we've been talking about, we've also been mentioning that rights are being chipped away at here at home.
Chipped away.
Okay.
Wholesale slaughter of rights.
Sledgehammer. We do have a caller though. Caller, whenever you're ready, just say hello and join the conversation. Okay. Well, whenever the caller's ready, just jump in and say hello. Okay. Sledgehammer.
Well,
All right.
Pete mentioned earlier about the ongoing pressure of people in the street demonstrations as being part of the whole package of political participation. And I went to the first large peace rally in D.C., and there was a tremendous difference between the way that the D.C. police handled us that day and the way that the NYPD handled us was just sometime later here in New York.
In your designated protest zone?
It was unbelievable. Protesters were treated as not even potential lawbreakers. We were wrong for being out there, and the NYPD was going to show us how wrong we were at any opportunity they got.
Okay. And we do have the opportunity for the caller now. Caller, whenever you're ready, just say hello and make your question or comment.
Yes, hi. I'm very happy that you're doing a program on this subject, because we're not getting enough of this kind of thing on regular TV, I'll say. But I would wonder if the group would discuss the subject of third-party candidates. And by that I mean specifically Ralph Nader. In the past 2 elections, I was a strong supporter of Nader. I even campaigned for him. I took signatures for him. This year, I'm having a heated, more than a debate, a heated argument with my former friends who are now still supporting Nader, and they just don't see how we cannot simply afford to have somebody like Nader be on the ballot in the swing states. And it's a question of their idealism versus seeing reality and how much trouble this country is in and how worse it's going to get if they don't put aside their personal beliefs for the moment for the sake of the country. That's how I feel. As much as I would like to see Nader really be president, we simply cannot afford to vote for him in swing states. And I was wondering if you could comment on that subject. And I'll hang up now.
Okay. Well, thank you for addressing that. From what I've read, aren't some major Republican donors
Republicans are donating
financing?
to the Nader campaign because they see him as a spoiler. I see him. I believe that he was in the spoiler role in the last election. I believe that if Nader had withdrawn from the election in October and supported Gore, we would not have Bush in the White House now. I think that's almost indisputable. I like Ralph Nader, and I think I'd rather have him as a president than Gore or Kerry. But under the present political system, there was absolutely no chance of that happening in the last election, just as there's no chance of it happening in this election. I wouldn't vote for Ralph Nader. I wouldn't vote for Jesus Christ right now if he was running as a third-party candidate, even though I know he would be better than anybody else on the ballot, because I would know that in America right now, a third-party candidate without some real restructuring happening is not able to win an election. And when you look at it from that perspective, I totally agree with our caller. We can't afford to vote for Nader right now. It doesn't matter if he's a better candidate. He's not an electable candidate under our system. The system is broken. Absolutely, the system is broken. But, and I didn't love Al Gore either. Al Gore didn't float my boat. But I guarantee you that if he was in the White House now, we would not be at war in Iraq. We would not be rolling back environmental protections. We would not be destroying the rights to free speech and reproductive rights and stem cell research. The list goes on.
Proposing useless constitutional amendments.
Useless constitutional amendments. We wouldn't be looking at the possibility of a draft. So I didn't love Al Gore, but I would have loved him to be our president on 9/11. I can tell you that. We would have gotten a much saner, more measured response. So with those type of possibilities, I totally agree with our caller that Ralph Nader right now is the type of candidate that we can't afford to vote for. We have to get back on our feet. We have to survive the disaster of George Bush.
Okay, and last 5 minutes, time flies.
Well,
I'd like to kind of discuss a little bit about what people can do. In addition to voting, what can people do to affect change? Voting in November is absolutely key. But in addition to that, what should people be doing to get active and to take part and build a better nation?
Okay, get involved. That's what people can do. Get involved in organizations. Pick an issue that really drives you, or issues that drive you. Find a group that's working on it. If there isn't, start organizing a group. Talk to people who are organizing and find out. Now, I've been in New York for 9-10 years now. I've been through a few groups. So I'll give a concrete example just because I was directly involved in this. I remember when they started all the scare and the panic mongering over West Nile disease. Right here in Queens is where it started in 1999. And for the next couple of summers, they just bombarded the city with pesticide spraying. I mean, it was patently absurd. Now they're not doing that. They do little bits and pieces of that. And the reason for that is because a group of us were so outraged at that time. Speaking of Nader, I was in the Green Party at that time. And we were so outraged at what was at this mass pesticide spraying, a completely irresponsible thing. In fact, the very people who were most at risk for West Nile disease were also the most at risk to get injured and hurt by the pesticides. So it was a completely opposite of rational response.
Right.
So we basically formed what ultimately became the No Spray Coalition, and we sued the city in federal court. The courts unfortunately we had a judge who was very biased against us, so we didn't really get anywhere. But that was important because that gave us the credibility with the corporate media that we're talking about, so we could call a press conference when our trial would come up, and it would come out, and that gave us an opportunity to speak. But mostly it was very hard grassroots organizing and organizing a lot of people and educating those people, because the mass media just, Giuliani would spout a few lies, and as usual, the Times, the Post, and the Daily News and the TV stations would just act as stenographers and write whatever he said down and never challenge it. And, there was an old saying, it's attributed to Gandhi, although I don't honestly know if Gandhi is the one who did it. But the saying goes, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they attack you, and then you win. And with the No Spray Coalition, we went through all that stages. We got completely ignored, then we were a bunch of kooks and nuts who got ridiculed. Then we got traction, we started making a difference, and then they started really attacking us. We didn't win because there's still some pesticide spraying, and we didn't make a wholesale change. But the city, 2 years running, put out a bid for a chemical company to come in and spray the entire city, because the city doesn't have the capability itself. And for 2 summers running, after we created enough of a grassroots pressure, no company will touch the contract. So no one will come in and do that job. So the city can do little spot spraying here and there, in this park here and that marsh over there. And that was strictly grassroots people, and none of us knew anything about pesticides. We had to learn all this stuff. We had to find out what chemicals were in this thing. Then we had to do research to find out what the dangers of these specific things are, and it was an immense learning curve. But we did it, and there's a prime example of go out and organize yourselves, and you can make all the difference. That's what you have to do.
I think even in a smaller scale, because some people are just intimidated by the scope of that, what anybody could do is start having the conversations. Get the information and start having the conversations. Some of them will be hard, but talk to your coworkers. If you are appalled, some of our callers today, they're so in agreement, they wish this information was out there, you can help to get it out there. You heard some of it today. Use it, take it out further.
Okay. And I believe, I thought we had a caller, but we lost the caller. So, okay, in addition, where can people find the groups? Where can people find community-based organizations that can help them get deeper involved?
Well, I did mention alternate.org. That's one place. Just follow the links from there, and I'm sure that Pete has some concrete suggestions on that.
Sure. There's other good sites on there, but I find with the internet, it's pretty easy to do. Do a text search, because what we found is as this West Nile panic mongering spread across the country, we would get calls all the time, because we set up a phone number for people could leave us messages. So we'd get a call from, hi, I'm in Indiana, they're about to spraying here, I'm on my own, what do I do? And we would get calls like this all the time, and they found us because they did a text search on there, and No Spray Coalition popped up, or whatever issue are. Go onto the internet. Almost everybody has a presence on there. You can go to a site like Alternet. There's other similar kinds of sites like that. Sometimes it's
difficult to weed out some of the less credible information from the truth, because it's one of the last places where there is total free speech.
Well, and you can sign up for newsletters if you trust Arianna Huffington, if you trust Michael Moore. These people have easily locatable
done a complete turnaround
websites.
in her point of view in the last few years.
Yeah, just get on their lists. Check out sites like adbusters.org, focusonthecorporation.org. They are amazing. That's Russell Machieber, and I can't remember the other writer's name, but they do exposés of inappropriate corporate influence and the buying of power in politics, the stories that don't really make it. Every year they give you the 10 worst corporations of the previous year in detail as to why. So if that's a focus of yours, you can get more information from there and follow the links to get more involved. And sometimes getting involved just means finding that information and getting it to 10 more people. Get them riled up about it and tell them to tell 10 people.
Right.
That's how change happens. People think, people talk, people act.
You form the web.
Yeah.
Right, and in every community, there's always organizations. You know, maybe there's not an organization that's fighting on a specific issue, but there's somebody who's fighting something on something that's related. So find out who they are. I mean, maybe you have some kind of environmental issue, so maybe there's no local grassroots or organization. So, but maybe there's a Sierra Club or some big group like that. Go to them and maybe say, hey, this is what I'm interested in, and maybe they say, oh, well, okay, well, here's a group that you want to get in touch with, and get in touch with existing activists, and they can steer you possibly into somebody who can link up with.
Okay, and where can people find more information about you?
Well, I don't really have a website. I have a lot of things organized all over the place. I can give you my email. I do have a pamphlet that I have, which unfortunately I don't have copies
Okay, well,
on
if
there.
you give out the email, and I'll put a link to it on the talkingabout.info website as well. So
Okay.
just throw out the email now in the last minute.
Okay, so it's pdolack, PDOLACK @gis.net. And if you're interested in a topic, perhaps I can steer you to the right person, or if you're interested in the underlying causes of the things that we're talking about, I have
We'll
a
get the
pamphlet on
information out,
that.
and there
Yeah.
will be a link at the www.talkingabout.info website. We heard a little bit of something at the beginning of the show, and we're going to be playing it going out. Jackie, what are we playing?
Something for Junior is a spoken word rock and roll song that we wrote after the torture scandal at Abu Ghraib became. It's our birthday present to George Bush, wishing him well his last birthday in the White House. It's at talkengine.net. You can download it for free, and the lyrics are there. And you can reach me using Jackie at talkengine.net, spelled talk engine. Pretty straightforward.
And we'll have a link to that on the talkingabout.info website, which will be up in the closing credits. And we're just about out of time, and I want to thank you again.
Thank you for having us, John.
It's been a great show, got a lot of information out. Want to remind the viewers that you can make a difference, and thank you. Have a good night.
Happy birthday, W. Sorry to spoil your vacation, but I got a little something for your 58th birthday celebration. The perfect gift for a commander-in-chief, unbelievably expensive and entirely unique. Trophies from a place you've never been before. Souvenirs from the inferno of unnecessary war.